We're actually the only thing standing between everyone having lunch and
tough spot. Oh, good.
So
yeah.
it's a tough spot. We're going to make
we'll
it
answer
really
quickly.
long. Yeah, we're going to fire lightning round. But it's great to have you here. I'd love to just start by, I would love just for you to introduce yourselves and what you're working on, and then we'll get into all of the questions that we have ready for this session. So Jason, why don't you start?
Yeah, sure. I'll be quick to the lunch comment.
Yeah.
So I'm Jason, leading Scale for the past 4 months, been at Scale for about 18 months, which is a long time in AI. And previous to this, I was at Uber for a long time, been in tech my entire life, and went into venture for a little bit. What we're working on is Scale primarily. If you don't know Scale, we supply a lot of the human data to the foundation models, and we also provide solutions to governments and enterprises to help solve some of their hardest, most valuable AI problems, which getting things to production can be hard, getting things into proof of concepts can sometimes be easy. We'll talk about that more later, but that's me. And so just enjoying the journey.
It's great to have you here.
Very good. Greg Ulrich, I'm with Mastercard. I look after AI and data. I've been doing that a little over a year. Before that, I led strategy and M&A for the firm. I joined from an acquisition of a data science company about 10 years ago. What we're focused on is, in our group, we have the data office, so data quality, data types, data rights, and our data platform, as well as AI centrally. It's a hub and spoke model, but the overall AI platforms, the prioritization, what we're going to focus on, the governance, and building scalable platforms for the organization to innovate with are the main focus points.
Great. Greg, I'm actually going to start with you. Well, first of all, as you know, we might actually be ranking the payment platforms coming up soon.
I got
that's
ideas.
Not the question.
I got ideas. I can write it for you. I'll send it to you tomorrow.
Okay. Well, send me a note. We may pay attention. No, but joking aside, I wanted to. There's a lot we want to cover here in the next 25 minutes on bubbles and timelines for ROI. But before we go to that, I wanted to start with you to talk and ask you about what has changed, do you think, for you in your deployment and all of the things that go into that in the last 4 to 6 months. And I'm asking that because it sort of leads us into the ROI question, and things are changing so quickly, right? It almost feels that we're on these sort of tectonic plates of change and moving from the testing to the thinking of scale and all of that. So I just wonder from your perspective, what has changed recently?
Yeah, I think scale is what's changed over the last 4 to 6 months. Maybe I'll give a couple examples, but everybody's had a variety of use cases, and I love what Marco said about it's the greatest time in the history to be a mouse. It is really easy to solve things in small scale, and a couple examples of how we had done that, but we struggled to scale. Like, one thing MasterCard has is several thousand consultants. And we help all of our partners with payments questions as well as digital innovation and other topics. But AI is a natural application for them for knowledge management, for consulting tools, from analytics to PowerPoint building to deep research and on. And we had mapped their journey, their job. We determined where Gen AI could have positive material impacts in their journey. And we developed tools to support that. And the first two worked in very small function. When we couldn't scale them out, it didn't work. Over the last 6 months, we now have a platform that's rolled out to every consultant, thousands of consultants. They're using it every day, and it's working to drive real productivity and efficiency in their lives and to help them get better answers. I think that move from experimenting to scale is what's changed. And then if I take a more externally facing use case, one of the things we do early on, Teresa was talking about fraud and fraud scoring. If you tap a Mastercard, we're going to see that transaction. We're going to apply a score to that transaction from 1 to 999 based on how likely we think that's legitimate or fraudulent. That goes to a bank. The bank says thumbs up or thumbs down based on their fraud rules. It comes back to us and the transaction gets approved. That has to happen very, very quickly. Latency matters a lot. And what we've been able to do now with Gen AI is add a whole bunch more data and context. Basically, think of a merchant graph that we've applied to the traditional scoring, where we see the likelihood that people would shop at different merchants, even if Jason's never shopped there before. We always had that idea. We never had the ability to do that at scale with the latency required to do that. Now that we've been able to bring in that additional data, so not just Jason's previous transaction, but everybody else's transaction at similar merchants, it's improved the fraud scoring with the same sort of false positive rate dramatically. And we had been able to get that done in like little test beds, and now we've been able to roll it out, across LAC, across Europe, across the world at scale. And so I think that's the big difference for us, is moving from good ideas that we could make work in a lab to things that we're able to deploy globally.
Oh, it's a great point. I'm dying to get into the bubble question, but actually before we do that, Jason, can we just, because, to Greg's point about, and the examples you just gave, and you and I have spoken about this thing, a question around you've got to pick the right problem. You've got to focus on the right thing. You can't just, and so I just wondered if you could comment on that, because you cover many sectors, not just financial services, right? You're deep into government work and healthcare and all of that. So talk to us about how you, what's the importance of picking the right problem or the right use case, and how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, that is the primary problem, because I think people are faced with this new technology that seems like a magic wand, and when you actually get into the implementation of it, it's not a magic wand. Like there is no magic wand for this, and so you have to pick the right problem that matches the technology that's actually possible to get all the way through, not just to a POC that's exciting, but to a production level value. Which this is actually a great example of what we see too, which is it's doing something that a human would be bad at, or previous technology would be bad at, which is cross-correlation of disparate data from unstructured data sets, is like an example. So a good problem is usually something that human beings are really bad at, that AI just happens to be really good at. So an example from our world is, so we work with Mayo Clinic, and one of the implementations we've done for them is we help them read lots and lots of documentation for their doctors before they see a patient. There's hundreds of pages of data actually for each of these doctors that they need to read and consume and process and understand to make the best diagnosis possible. Very, very difficult. But AI does this quite well, right? It'll notice patterns that doctors can't. It consumes the data in all its different formats. And so then it'll provide recommendations before that doctor goes in so they give a better diagnosis, which has lots of downstream effects. That's something that like a human being might be, and I'm making these numbers up, but might be 10 or 20% good at, that AI out of the box, obviously with, like making it bespoke to the specific use case, is maybe 60 or 70%. And then you're off to the races because you're already showing value, you're excited about it, and then you can implement this like data flywheel to make it better. Data flywheel basically means human feedback, usage feedback into the models and into the context so that the solution becomes better. So finding the workflows where humans are really bad, or humans really don't want to do it, or they have a hard time focusing on it, reading large amounts of documentation, or in this case, like reports, cross-correlating things that it's hard to keep in our head. These are like some characteristics of use cases that tend to find a lot of success. Yeah.
And if I can stick with you, Jason, just on that point around, picking the right problem, but also the timeline. And we've talked a lot about ROI, but I think, and we won't sort of go into sort of where are you seeing that, but more interesting, I think, is to look at that timeline from the perspective of, there's a lot of conversation around bubble appearing, and there's various types of bubbles. And the MIT report, would love to get your comments on that. What did you take away from that? And the timeline of the ROI leads into the question of the bubble. You talk about financial bubbles, you talk about bubbles of expectations and so on. So one of you could comment a bit on that.
Yeah, of course. Look, I think the MIT report that came out said 95% of proof of POCs effectively don't add value, or something to that effect, which was a bit of a relief for us, frankly, because we've been not only because it justifies some of the services we offer, but it also reflected our day-to-day.
95% of scales work.
It also reflected what we were seeing on the ground that we couldn't put words to, right? So we would go into customers 6 months ago and say, hey, to change this multi-$100 million process that will save you hundreds of millions of dollars is going to take more than a month. And the response from many customers was, whoa, this competitor X was in here a day ago and they just vibe coded the solution in front of us. And we're like, no, you don't understand. That can't go to production. They're like, what do you mean it won't go to production? I'm listening to all the model builders telling me it's like magic in a box and AGI is coming. So like I have been relieved that like people are starting to come out and say, hey, like a year to get to hundreds of millions of dollars of savings is actually quite quick, which is more on the timelines we're seeing to go from like idea to iteration to working through the customer to all the change management that needs to happen to the approvals for legal, risk departments, all the things that you deal with. Those things, you can get it done in 9 to 12 months, which if you go back 6 years, that would have sounded like a magic wand.
Yeah.
So I think the bubble of expectations is definitely here. And hopefully as that deflates, but like what's happening under the hood is like the capabilities are getting better at a pretty steep rate. And if you go back a year or two and remember what our experience with this technology was, it was far less sophisticated than it is today. And so you fast forward 2 more years, and I think the open question that nobody knows the answer to is, will it continue to accelerate at this, will the curve continue to steepen, or will there be a top of an S curve or multiple S curves on our way there? I think history would say there'll be multiple S curves on the way there, but no one really knows.
I think you make a really good point on this, on the sort of the time, the expectations of timing versus the reality of expectations, and where that also gets frustrating. You even saw it in your report and what you were talking about in the beginning of the day. Like, there's material change and there's material progress, and people are deploying this in more ways. But I think the narrative out there gets bucketed in one of two things: either this is amazing and it's going to be amazing within the next like 12 to 24 hours, or this is completely overblown. And just like a lot of things, I think we get this extremism in the communication. And I don't think it's very helpful for having good constructive debates about what's realistic and what's not. The MIT report, I think, on one hand, I think it is there's a lot useful in it. It does take time for these things to happen. The reasons people aren't getting to scale, like they don't have their data in the right spot, or they've built things in an experimentation versus a production scale environment, and they're not, like, the lessons in there are very good, but that 95% I think is, like, it's wrong. What the report said, if you read it, is 2 things. One, organizations using enterprise level, like Enterprise GPT, Copilot, 80% are investigating those, 40% are getting value. And then if you go to like role specific agents, like I'm trying to replace something in my legal process, or I'm taking my Ask HR bot and making that a Gen AI chat bot instead of having someone call a person or email a person, 60% of companies are investigating that, 20% have tried things, and 5% have found success. And then they took 100 minus 5 equals 95. 95% of organizations are getting value. I think there's another way to frame it, which is, if 20% have tried things and 5% have gotten value, 1 out of 4 pilots has had value, which is actually a great statistic and great progress. And then it has to be, it's based on surveys, not financial data, had to be realized in 6 months. All these things that we know are not realistic, but it inflates this number to a place that it creates this clickbait headline that I find the point underneath it is so valuable, but I find the extremism of the message to be unhelpful overall.
Yeah. I mean, and since we have a financially minded audience here, I think that there's one thing that's different about this cycle than previous tech cycles, which is the people driving a lot of the competition and the development are the most profitable, largest companies in the world. Mm-hmm. And so even if, there's a lot of talk about like, are we in a financial bubble? Are we not? I think hard to say when you have companies who can spend $50 billion a year every single year until everything catches up.
Whether or not cash flow positive.
Yeah, right. And still generate profits and still have a balance. Yeah. So I don't know what they will decide to do. I have no intel. I mean, there's some game theory going on because they're all competing with each other, but they can afford to. And that didn't really exist in previous cycles.
Yeah. In a previous session today, Drew was mentioning the pressure from China. And I was just wondering if that's something that what are your thoughts there? As in,
yeah, well, we do a lot of work.
Saying, it's given away for free.
On the commercial side.
Yes, on the commercial side.
Yeah. Well, there's also the national security side. We do a lot of work with the Department of Defense,
yes.
and provide a lot of AI solutions to them for various things. I think there's China's moving super fast, obviously, on the commercial front. All of the open source models they have, the quality of them, the speed of them. But then there's another issue, which is AI will be used in government to maintain or accelerate a competitive advantage against your adversary in some way. It's already starting to happen, so I think that's also an interesting story, but not a banking story.
It's always interesting to talk about the geopolitics side, but we'll leave that for later. I just wanted to go back, Greg, to you on the deployment of the use cases that you've mentioned, but also sort of take us maybe further into the thinking around agentic and agentic AI within the company, and sort of where you are, or the sector maybe on the payment platforms.
Sure, I think within payments, the place where agentic is coming in is what we're going to see in the world of commerce, right? As you've seen OpenAI announce, Perplexity's done this for a while, the ability to transition from getting recommendations and doing search to completing a transaction within that flow. And I think there's a lot of things we're doing with agentic internally, but if you're talking about the payments industry, I think that's where we're seeing, the next click of transformation. It starts off with, pretty easy use cases. I'm looking for running shoes. It's giving me a recommendation, and then it can say, click, I want to buy these running shoes. As it'll have more information, it knows that I run X miles a week, and that I like trail running, and that I like a few different brands, and it'll find something on sale and start making recommendations. And so I think we'll start seeing commerce come into the fold quite a bit more, and then bring in more and more data. From our perspective, our goal is to make sure that as that transition happens, that these transactions happen with the same trust, security that people expect from normal online transactions, which includes tokenization technology, security protocols, providing consented user data to personalize transactions. So we're focused a lot on enabling that infrastructure to make sure that it works, because I think that there's a lot that it's going to happen, I believe. I think it's going to happen at pace, and I think it can happen very productively, but making sure we capture the intent, validate that intent, and make sure that this ecosystem has sort of closed-loop validation on it will make sure it has the highest level of security and customer satisfaction so things don't go awry.
Yeah. Jason, and your sort of reflections on where we are on that agentic journey.
Yeah, just to share, that's a great example. Just to share sort of where we start our conversations with customers around some of the agentic systems. So an agent is not to get in the technicals, but it's a software program that decides when to start and stop its execution, right? So it's a little bit different than just an AI-enabled software application. But what we sort of go through with customers is, all right, if you have an agent that produces the right outcome 85% of the time, let's say it's one agent, it spins up, decides to do an action, 85% of the time it's right. You think you can get it to 95, before it's production ready, and then it's got to escalate to a human for guidance or whatever it does in the cases where it doesn't feel confident. So that's like one agent, right? And agents being software applications that sort of determine their own, decide what to do. If you have a 10-agent system, that's 0.85, and they're all 85% accurate. That's 0.85 to the 10th power accuracy by the end of the system. So, I think we should all just be grounded in the actual accuracy of these systems. It does not scale in the way that we maybe imagine up front. So I think to get to these levels of complexity, new systems are being built and are going to have to be built if you're going to have these massively complex agentic systems. So we encourage simplicity in everything. Choose the right problem and then choose the simplest path to the solution. And if you start out with that mindset, you're more likely to get outcomes than starting with we need agents, which is where a lot of customers start.
And we want them in a month, please.
Yeah. Can I have 1,000? And you're like, you don't need 1,000, you need 2.
Yeah, no, there is that. What is it they say? Overhyped. in the short term.
Yeah.
And then
I think that's
underhyped in the long term.
Yeah, we are definitely in that moment. In 10 years, like I actually think this transition, like it's fantastical to think about, like how disruptive it will be, and people like to, whether or not they say it, they pay attention to things that are fearful, they pay attention to things that are exaggerated. But the reality is we will probably just ease into this world smoother than we're all anticipating today. I know there's a lot of opinions on that, but that's my view.
And I think that it goes back to your point on timing. Like I think this trajectory is going in a pretty steep and steady curve on the actual improvement of the underlying quality and the ability to deploy it. The noise cycle around it is so volatile that you get into these. It sort of changes the narrative and the discussion. But I think we're on a very good curve to more deployment of high quality things at scale than we've been in the past.
We have 2 minutes left, and then it is, I promise, there is lunch on the other side over there. But in those last 2 minutes, I just thought it would be great to just spend a little time on this question around how you, the human aspect of deployment, because what we hear a lot in, what slows down getting use cases into production, and we've talked at length about, there's the governance, the risks, there's getting the talent, there's figuring out what problems you're going to solve and all of that. But we also hear increasingly that it is the layer down, like, it's great to have a CEO and senior leadership that really bangs the drums on AI, and that's super important. But the burden of that transformation actually sits in very much on the shoulders of the heads of lines of business across the banks and insurance companies and so on. And with that is, there's a whole, ability to see how can my function or area completely be transformed. Because to your point, we will go up at some point, the curve, and this will fully transform the way that we operate as businesses, right? How do you do that? How do you
in 30 seconds or less?
You've got 32 seconds. Yeah.
Okay, there's three sort of elements of that I think are interesting. One is how the human side comes into the governance process, which I'll sort of put to the side. We can talk about that. There's a second one, how the human comes into making each actual products better and improve the efficacy of them. If I go back to what I said earlier about creating a series of agents for a consulting force, that took off when there were some technology issues we got wrong the first time. There's some data issues, but really co-developing that with the team and getting the feedback on a regular basis enabled that to take off at scale. And I think bringing the user base into that has been very, very useful. And the third piece is around, I think you're talking about almost like the organizational dynamic and how you get this across the organization. We've had sort of very top-down and very bottoms-up approaches to that, and now we're kind of those have been helpful, but now we're kind of hitting in the middle, where the sort of senior leadership, not the CEO direct on a level below, having true ownership about what their short-term and long-term roadmap is. And we've sort of formalized that a little bit more using a centralized team to say, here are the things where we have ready-made problems that can be addressed today, and here's short-term use cases that we're going to prioritize, and here's what we're going to do. And now separately, how are we going to reimagine your function? So we think about not what we're going to deploy in the first half of 2026 to drive productivity or to drive new revenue, but how do we want to rethink our HR department? How do we want to rethink our legal department? How do we want to rethink more fundamental business processes so we can build on those? And I think sort of forcing both conversations has been useful. So that's one of the other things we've done in 2025 relative to 2024.
Jason, do you want to comment on that?
I think I'm going to go back to my main point, which is problem selection, drives success. And if you select the right problem and you think through all the dynamics, not just the technical ones we've talked about, but also your own organizational dynamics, who's going to get in the way? What data do you need access to make this work? Is that easily accessible? Are there misaligned incentives around getting that data, or the organization, because we work with large organizations? Just think the problem all the way through to if it's successful from an org standpoint, from a people standpoint. And then you start building the relationships early, because all of this is about trust. And you have to be there in the office as a solutions provider. You have to be there in the office, building trust, building relationships, going to lunch, this ultimately comes down to, hey, what's in it for me? Does this help me accomplish my job? What are my incentives in the company? And then, if you handle those issues in serial, then it takes a lot longer than if you start handling them up front in parallel, so you can get outcomes a lot faster.
Great.
And with that,
lunch.
A great transition to lunch. Jason, Greg, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.